back of my head.
I'm going to introduce her here in a moment, but I did want us to reflect for a moment about Bill Michelet, who was driving force behind this organization for many, many years and was our treasurer for several decades, and it was a big part of his life. And this is our first meeting since he passed away 2 weeks ago, right after this meeting concluded. So if we could pause for just a moment to reflect on the life of Bill Michelet. And now here is Sheila McCann to introduce our speaker today, Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana, the Honorable Jay Dardenne.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to remind you that only members of the press club and working members of the press are allowed to ask questions. And I'd ask everyone to please silence their cell phones. Our guest today is Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne. Jay Dardenne was re-elected to a 4-year term as Louisiana's Lieutenant Governor in 2011. Prior to that, he served as the Secretary of State, and he's also served as a state senator and a Baton Rouge Metro councilman. As Lieutenant Governor, he heads the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, which includes state parks, the museum system, the state library, the arts, the Seafood Promotion and Marketing Board, and Volunteer Louisiana. Since taking over as the Lieutenant Governor, tourism numbers have skyrocketed in the state of Louisiana. Lieutenant Governor Dardenne has received numerous awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. In 2012, he received the National Public Leadership for the Arts Award from Americans for the Arts and the President's Award from Louisiana Public Broadcasting. He is an active community volunteer, having hosted the Jerry Lewis Telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association for more than 30 years. He conducts many special presentations about Louisiana, including Why Louisiana Ain't Mississippi. He is an attorney and graduate of Baton Rouge High School, Louisiana State University, and the LSU Law Center. He is a member of the LSU Alumni Hall of Distinction, Baton Rouge High School Hall of Fame, and the Manship School of Mass Communications Hall of Fame. He is married to the former Kathy McDonald. Please help me welcome Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne.
Thank you, Sheila. When I took office as Lieutenant Governor in November of 2010, Louisiana was reeling from the disaster in the Gulf. Signs appeared in restaurants in New York City that said, "We don't serve Gulf seafood." We set about the task of dealing with the misperception about the quality of Louisiana seafood and the challenge of making certain Louisiana could remain competitive in the tourism marketplace. I had told voters that Louisiana had a great story to tell and asked them to let me tell it. I promised to do more with less, and we did, starting with shrinking the size of the Lieutenant Governor's office, combining the functions of the Lieutenant Governor's office in the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, eliminating some meaningless positions, and assuming the job of managing the department, not hiring the highest paid person in the department heretofore, which had been the secretary of the department. In the face of ongoing cuts to the tourism budget, we were able to, and were fortunate to have a one-time infusion of money from BP following the spill for advertising and for events. We viewed those funds, as I think we should have, as non-recurring dollars. They have all run out now, and they're not going to be coming back. And we use them for that purpose. More than a third of the money that we got for events from BP went to fund our bicentennial celebration in 2012. We wouldn't have had one if we had not had that money to make certain that we commemorated the 200th birthday of Louisiana. A large chunk of the money also went to host the Grand Reveille, the Great Awakening, which brought thousands of French-Canadian visitors to Louisiana, and that's been a staple of our attempt over the course of the past 4 years to focus on international tourists. I want to run through just a couple of slides so you can see the success of tourism over the course of the past year. Our tourism summit was last week in Jefferson Parish. We had almost 500 people representing the tourism industry for 3 days to talk about the business of tourism, and we unveiled some of the numbers that you're about to see. It was a record-breaking year, and these numbers have been out before, but I want to stress them because they're strong numbers for our state. 27.3 million people visited Louisiana in 2013. That's 1 million more than visited the state during our previous record-breaking year of 2012. They spent $10.8 billion, and they left behind $807 million in state tax revenue that no one in this room and no citizen of the state of Louisiana had to pay. It's almost $1 billion in state revenue from folks who don't live in Louisiana but who are visiting here. A testimony really to the strength that this industry is for Louisiana's economy, in addition to being a job creator, with 1 out of every 10 people in Louisiana working in the tourism industry. Our Office of Tourism became only the 2nd state in America to be certified by the Destination Marketing Association Incorporated, joining Florida as the other state. This is the Good Housekeeping seal of approval based upon best practices, budgetary practices, and your overall tourism message, including our new brand that we had introduced, Pick Your Passion. And for the first time ever, the office was named the Southeast Tourism Office of the Year. Just real quickly on this graph, the purpose of showing you this is the number of hits we've had to LouisianaTravel.com. When I took office in November of 2010, I told our staff that I wanted LouisianaTravel.com to be in the top 10 most visited tourism websites in America. I reiterated that after the election in 2011. And this year, and we've just gotten these statistics in, this year we learned that Louisiana ranks 4th in America in a new digital engagement ranking that has been compiled to determine the number of visits to your website, your social media activity, your Facebook efforts, your tweeting, and what have you. And Louisiana follows only Michigan, Massachusetts, and Oregon on this digital engagement ranking for the entire country. So we've not only busted into the top 10, we've busted now into the top 5, and I want us to keep going upward. I mentioned earlier about employment. 210,000 Louisianians work in this industry, the fifth largest employment sector in the state of Louisiana, and we're constantly reminding people that tourism and travel means jobs for Louisiana. It's going to continue to be a growth industry for the state as we continue to increase the number of visitors we have in Louisiana. Mentioned earlier about our international visitation. We put a bullseye on trying to make certain we do the best job we can to attract international visitors to Louisiana. They stay longer, they spend more money, and they're more curious about the state than domestic visitors. And they have a natural kinship with Louisiana, particularly French-speaking citizens as well as Spanish-speaking visitors. When they get to Louisiana, they feel at home. And we hear this repeatedly. And we learned just a few weeks ago that in 2013, we experienced an 18% increase in international visitation. That is the largest percentage increase of any state in the United States of America. So our efforts to attract foreign visitors to Louisiana is paying off. And you can see the money that they spent while they're here, an awful lot of money. And this is a potential untapped marketplace that we really have not taken full advantage of in past years. And it's one you'll continue to see us focusing on, certainly at least for the next year while I'm in this position. I want to show you 4 television spots, and you're getting kind of a sneak preview of this. These won't start running until shortly after the first of the year, but these are the new spots that have been developed to help us promote our year of food. We celebrated the year of music in 2013. We're celebrating the culture of Louisiana and all the things that make us unlike any other place in America this year. And next year we'll put the spotlight on food. This by no means says to you that we're only looking at that as a marketing tool, but we're concentrating our efforts in that because we had so much success doing so with music and with our cultural activities. So these are the spots that will start running in our drive markets and other selected cities across America beginning early next spring, and you'll see all 4 of them right in the road. Hope it makes you hungry. You're already here, so you're not going to be seeing a lot of those spots in Louisiana. But you will see them occasionally because of a partnership we have with Louisiana broadcasters to run those sometimes when there's available time. We just learned literally this morning that in terms of where we are right now in our tourism effort, we're looking at a 7.6% increase in hotel occupancy thus far in this calendar year, which is particularly encouraging since last year we had the Super Bowl, and that's really the only month, February, that was kind of down from occupancy. All the other drivers of data for the hotel industry, the average daily rate, are all up as well. So we're hopeful and optimistic that that signals this year is going to be even better than our record-setting year last year. In order to make sure that we're thinking ahead as to what we want to do with tourism in Louisiana, after my term ends, we're having 3 town hall meetings across the state beginning later this month. We picked 3 marketplaces, each of which has an emerging industry or an emerging opportunity that we really have not capitalized on before. So on September 16th, we'll be in Shreveport at the Municipal Auditorium, where we've been involved in attempting to bring back the Louisiana Hayride and bring back the efforts of the Municipal Auditorium, which has undergone a beautiful facelift, but kept the original stage that Elvis was on, but expanded the seating a little bit, but again retained all the original seats in the upper area. So that's a great potential marketplace for the state. We'll be in Lafayette on October the 15th at Vermilionville to talk about economic opportunities and tourism opportunities from the growth that's expected in the whole Lake Charles, Lafayette, Southwest Louisiana corridor over the course of the next several years. And we'll be in Monroe on October 27th at the Chenault Museum to talk about the success, the really unprecedented success that Monroe in Northeast Louisiana is enjoying as a result of Duck Dynasty, improvements to the Chenault Museum, and of course the Poverty Point announcement that we made not too long ago that Poverty Point is now going to be the 22nd place in America, the 1001 place in the world to be a World Heritage Site. We'll have a formal dedication of that site on October the 11th, a big celebration on site there, and we'll be working to try and make sure we take advantage of the opportunities that await Northeast Louisiana. Some of you know I've mentioned before that a very remote site in New Mexico, which is one of the 21 World Heritage Sites in America, is about 50 miles off the interstate. You have to travel 3 miles over a road, dirt road, that is so bad that they actually have warnings on that road about people getting to the destination. Despite that, that site increased its tourism annually from 10,000 visitors to 30,000 visitors the year after they became a World Heritage Site. So we think there's great potential for the very accessible Poverty Point, which is 20 minutes off of I-20. Now, let me turn my attention now to Louisiana's future and in my role in making certain that it's a bright one. I have spent my entire life here in Louisiana. I love this place. I love Louisiana. The people of our state have entrusted me with 4 public positions, and I've endeavored to merit that trust. In each job that I've held, my goal has been to leave that office better than I found it and to deliver open, responsive, and honest service to Louisianians who they should expect nothing less from their public officials. Throughout my lifetime, it seems Louisiana has been a story of lost opportunity. But we are so blessed that we continue to keep getting opportunities, more and more. Perhaps our biggest one awaits those who will lead our state beginning in 2016. We're poised for an economic revival that will blend the natural resources of our oil and gas and petrochemical industry with the creative potential of Louisiana and a society that demands skills and expertise that were unheard of just a generation ago. It is yet another opportunity and one that we cannot afford to squander. We live in a Louisiana that has clearly become more conservative. It's more business friendly, and it's more expectant of high ethical standards for our public officials than ever before. But we also live in a time in Louisiana where the partisan divide has never been greater. This is not characteristic of who we are as a people, nor is it an environment that will enable us to reach our full potential. We need leadership with an undivided attention on Louisiana and a 24/7 commitment to do what it takes to make government work. This requires a governor who will offer everyone a seat at the table, who will listen as much as he speaks, and who will welcome input as to what it takes to make our state even greater. We don't need Washington politics and Washington practices to make Louisiana prosper. To the contrary, we need the wisdom of a generation of Louisianians who know what we need to do, fused with the enthusiasm of a younger generation that is moving here to take advantage of the opportunity that awaits us in the years ahead. For example, an unprecedented explosion of jobs related to the oil and gas and petrochemical base, high-paying jobs that will require technical proficiency from our growing community and technical college system, which was created a little more than a decade ago with my legislation when I sat in the Louisiana Senate. The need for engineers and computer science majors with 4-year degrees from universities that have centers of excellence that can focus on these priorities and determine where the job market is and where it will be in the years ahead. An environment that continues to nurture musicians, film and animation specialists, culinary artists, and those whose creative talents add spice to the unique flavor of Louisiana and make us unlike any other place in the country. Let me mention a few non-exclusive specifics. We need to examine very carefully every exemption, every credit, every exclusion, every exception to make certain that our tax policies in Louisiana are fair and responsive to the current demands, not those that may have existed years or even decades ago when laws were enacted. The legislature is committed to this effort during the upcoming session, but we know it's an election year, and that task may very well fall to the next administration to address. We cannot and we will not tax our way to prosperity, and we've got to keep in mind that the Kiplinger letter recently ranked Louisiana as 3rd in America as the most tax-friendly state, a notch higher than the rating we enjoyed a short time ago from the Tax Foundation. We need transparency in the executive branch of government in order to truly have a gold standard of ethics. Efforts have been made to try and make certain that happens. I intend to work closely with good government groups who have been advocating changes in the law that will accomplish that task. We need a renewed emphasis on funding for all post-secondary education. The WISE Fund is an excellent model, and it, along with the Workforce Innovation Council, has established a level of cooperation that has long been needed among entities who sometimes view each other not as partners, but as competitors. And an announcement will be made, I believe, this afternoon when the WISE Council votes on how to distribute the initial funds that are made available. And that vote is going to signal a compromise on the part of all the entities who will share in the WISE dollars, and a recognition that each of the systems of higher education in this state have a specific role to play to meet the obligation of satisfying the job demands that are going to be facing Louisiana in the months and years ahead. We need a budget process that truly centers on prioritization, funding programs at levels to achieve excellence, and not consistently falling back on across-the-board cuts that treat every aspect of government as equals, regardless of their successes or failures. Government can't do everything, but what it does, it should do well. And I certainly hope and expect to be able to call upon my background as chair of the Senate Finance Committee for 4 years and vice chair for 4 years to help implement some changes in how we view the budget process. We need to recognize that our economic growth in the future will be contingent on an infrastructure that can move people and products in an efficient manner. Transportation dollars need to be spent for transportation purposes, and a renewed emphasis, as has been signaled with some legislation and some resolutions in the past, on our port system in Louisiana is a vital part of that because of the potential we have for even more international exports and imports, particularly with the reopening of the Panama Canal and the blend that we can create between bringing international visitors to Louisiana and then convincing them to be international investors in Louisiana. Perhaps there's no greater challenge than implementing the master plan to save America's wetland. Prudent and timely use of the monies that are going to become available to Louisiana as a result of the Restore Act, Go Mesa, and other potential sources is going to be critical. As we all know, we are at a flashpoint in addressing this issue. And I've worked closely with America's Wetland Foundation on 2 of their initiatives, one which centered around preserving cultural communities in Louisiana in the face of the shrinking shoreline. And the other one dealt with taking full advantage of the Mississippi River and recognizing that what affects folks along the river in the northern part of this country dramatically impacts what happens to us in Louisiana and vice versa. And that has been an effort, a multi-state effort that I co-chaired with the Democratic Governor of Illinois to bring people together and talk about how we can take full advantage of the Mississippi River and, more importantly, sustain it as the engine of commerce that it is for this country. And finally, we need a governor who is going to partner with a lieutenant governor to take advantage of the economic reality of tourism. Tourists seldom leave here saying, I never want to go back there again. They always say, I can't wait till I go back to Louisiana and find another place in that interesting state that I can experience. If they visit here and visit again, they're more likely to become investors in Louisiana. And if they invest in Louisiana, they're even more likely to retire here. And this is another great untapped resource for Louisiana, is to take advantage of our status as a retirement destination for those who are entering retirement years. I can say with some authority now that the 60-year-old of this generation is a lot different than the 60-year-old of a generation ago. They're more active, they're more interested in culture, they want things to do. They're not interested in necessarily retiring in the traditional sense of the word. They're looking for an affordable place that offers them an opportunity to experience the outdoors and to experience multiple cultures and to experience fun. And I happen to be describing the state of Louisiana, not to mention the tax-friendly status that we presently enjoy. Retirement can be another driver of Louisiana's economy. So when I travel throughout the United States or even travel internationally, I won't be looking for votes, I'll be looking for jobs. With that, I'll be glad to try and answer any questions that you may have. Now, how do you have something? Melinda?
You were talking about the need to examine all the tax breaks that exist. How do you see that playing out? I mean, do you see that as a way to possibly generate additional money for the budget, or do you see that as a way to offset taxes elsewhere?
Well, I think primarily the former. I think you're probably going to see it being reviewed, as it will be done during the session right now, to determine whether or not it can generate revenue for Louisiana based on the fact that some of the exclusions, exemptions, credits, and what have you are outdated based upon their implementation years and years ago. And I think that's the inquiry that needs to be made. We've got to be practical about those benefits that are being granted and make certain that they're fair to other taxpayers of Louisiana. And everything needs to be on the table. Every one of these exemptions, credits, and so on has a constituency. We all know that. Nobody is going to want anything to be monkeying with. But it's time, I think, for us to take a very careful and candid look at all of those and determine whether or not that it's appropriate to make some changes.
But it's not to set parameters that generate money in one place would then be offset with the tax cut elsewhere.
It should not be conditioned on that, no. And I don't think it will be in the discussions that take place, although I don't really know that anything will happen during this session, obviously, being the election year and the offset that has been suggested thus far.
Jerry, on the transportation, when you say transportation dollars should be used for transportation, does that mean that you favor not diverting some transportation money, say, for state police?
Yes.
And does it go beyond that, since that's a relatively modest part of the whole
Well,
transportation?
it is modest, and we need to make sure that there are not any further diversions from the money that we've got right now to be able to take care of the transportation needs that we have.
Jay, at Rotary a couple of weeks ago, Greg Albright, the legislative fiscal officer, didn't paint a particularly rosy picture. He said his data doesn't show that many new jobs, and suggested that it's going to be a real difficult time for the next governor coming in to plug, all kinds of holes and one-time only money and.
Well, I don't disagree with his assessment that it's going to be a difficult challenge for the next governor. Greg, who I respect a great deal, is generally extremely conservative, though, in the manner in which he looks at everything. For example, he does not view the income that's received from the Super Bowl as being non-recurring money. As we looked at that and said, this doesn't happen clearly every year, so how can that be considered part of the recurring budget of the state? And he said, well, it does, because we factor all things in, and maybe good and maybe bad. So that's an example of one thing where I've taken exception to Greg's conclusion. And he certainly flies in the face of some other active economists who have painted a much rosier picture. And of course, I think all of us hope that the future is going to be as bright as some of the optimistic predictions about what's going to happen in the industries along South Louisiana. And that work is starting to happen. The dirt has been turned, projects are moving, and I have every expectation that we're going to see a brighter future despite his caveats.
Have you started looking at what kind of budget situation you would inherit in terms of kind of the details of the one-time money and the holes in the various trust funds that have disappeared and that kind of thing? I mean, have you gotten into the weeds in that yet?
No, Kendra, I have not yet. Obviously, I will, and I intend to, but I have not as of this moment.
Because they're obviously, going off of what Beth was just talking about with Greg, I mean, there does seem to be this concept that there's going to be sort of a train wreck for the next governor to work out in terms of the immediate short-term budget situation. So I guess I'm just wondering, are you anticipating a real budget problem that the next governor inherits? And if so, when do you start doing your homework on how you could fix it?
Well, I'll do it in plenty of time as we get involved in the true campaign season. This is really kind of the pre-season, if you will. Nobody's really focused on next year as much with the races that are taking place this year. But because of the potential train wreck, it's all the more important that you've got an engineer who's going to get in there and work with people and try and figure out ways that we can make the budget challenge a responsible one for the people of Louisiana. The hope is that in the out years things will improve quite a bit, but I certainly don't stand here and tell you that I think there's going to be an immediate turnaround that will take place on early January 2016. I think we're going to continue to see some of the challenges, some of the problems that we faced during the past several years.
Following up on Melinda's initial question, are you prepared to say that there would be virtually no chance, or how much of a chance do you think there may be to perhaps revitalize Governor Jindal's prior efforts to abolish the state income tax? And if that were accomplished, if it's your role as Lieutenant Governor in over-tourism, do you think that might be an enhancement to retirees to settle here versus Florida or Texas?
I don't think it will happen anytime soon. I don't think it will happen in the next session. I think there'll continue to be discussions about that, and I think there should continue to be discussions about that. It would be great to eliminate the income tax if we could do so responsibly. And those discussions, I hope, will start in this last year of this term, and I'm sure they're going to continue into the next term as well. When you look at Louisiana's retirement rankings on a number of lists, we are in the top 10 and on a number of independent findings of where people ought to retire. Cities in cities in Louisiana are found to be in the top 10 lists of places that people want to retire. So I think people would look for a place maybe that doesn't have any income tax, but I think they're also looking at the whole panoply of taxes as well as the state and what it's like. Is it the place I want to be as I spend my sunset years? Is it the place where I know I can have fun, where I can do things? And I think that's as much of a component of that decision as is retirement. And we know that we're going to focus on military retirees, just as an aside on this retirement question, because Barksdale and Belle Chase and Fort Polk and other places afford us great opportunities to go to people who weren't born in Louisiana but have spent a considerable amount of time in this state and fallen in love with Louisiana, and we want to make sure we entice them to come back if they've left or convince them to stay if they're still here.
Thank you.
It's often said of Louisiana that it's a very pro-life state. I know that you voted no on the Human Life Protection Act when you were in the Senate, but maybe that was in error. So I kind of wanted to ask you, give you a chance to clear up your stance on the issue. Would you support a personhood constitutional amendment such as the one that was voted on in Colorado or Mississippi?
That would ban all abortion?
Yeah, and also IUDs and getting rid of fetuses for, yeah.
Well, I have to see the legislation. I'm not familiar with the particular legislation you're talking about. I consistently have voted pro-life and will continue to support that pro-life position. And that was an error that you referred to that was clarified immediately afterwards and has been clarified in the 4 times I've run for statewide office since then.
But you wouldn't support personhood constitutional amendment?
Well, I want to see what it says, and I want to see what the U.S. Supreme Court has to say about it, too, as to how far it can go. And then I would evaluate whatever language is put forth in Louisiana. Yes.
Okay, we have a Cherry Hospital privatization in progress, and in plus, we got privatization of the Medicaid program as it exists, and we have all these outstanding questions about whether or not the state's going to try to take advantage of expanded coverage under Medicaid under one of many formats. So where are you on all of that? Where do you think the real problems are in the current system?
Well, I think the privatization of the Cherry Hospital system, philosophically for Louisiana, is a very good move. I certainly think there's some lingering questions, particularly with the new hospital that's going to open in New Orleans, as to whether or not it's going to be able to achieve the patient mix that's necessary to make sure it can sustain itself from an operational standpoint. I think there's been a good level of cooperation among the private hospitals who have entered into the public system I think those who are not part of the public system, as we've seen here in Baton Rouge with Baton Rouge General, have some legitimate issues. When they become the point of first relief, if you will, for folks who show up to an emergency room and they're forced to take them because of EMTALA, and then they're not moving on to the public-private hospital as they're expected to do. Those are the kind of things that are going to continue, I think, to generate some questions and generate some issues, as well as the medical education to the public, which is also going to be a point of discussion out there, particularly based on what we've seen in Shreveport. So where I am, I'm understanding the problems that we're facing. I think the move was a good one overall for Louisiana, but I think there are going to be budget questions and implementation questions that are going to have to be answered as we move forward.
Anything on coverage expansion?
Well, as I've said before, I think we ought to look at it. I don't think Louisiana has taken the time to look at it objectively with folks in the medical community, folks from our budget staffs in the House and the Senate, to evaluate what it would mean for Louisiana and to attempt to craft some kind of an exception that could be submitted that would give Louisiana some wiggle room if federal funds were reduced, and to make certain that we could create the kind of plan that other states have tried to do in order to make certain that the indigent population of Louisiana is well cared for. There's an interesting article yesterday that talked about the dollars that states who have not accepted the money are losing, if you will, with those funds being redirected to other states. That's not reason enough to say we ought to accept the money, but as I've said before, I don't think we've done the kind of provided the kind of sincere scrutiny that we should as to whether or not a plan could be developed, because it was pretty clear that the government was not going to accept the money.
So Jay, what's your process examining these issues? Do you have a kitchen cabinet? Are you having listening tours? Or are you doing research? What's your strategy?
A little bit of both. I don't have a kitchen cabinet per se that I could describe for you right now, but I'm talking to people whose opinions I value. I'm reading as much as I can about issues that are facing the state. I'm drawing on some of my knowledge that I have already from my service in the Senate, my service as the head of two significant state agencies. And I welcome input from anybody and everybody. I seldom refuse to meet with anybody because I want to get input from as many people as I can, hear as many viewpoints as I can, and talk to as many people as possible, because that's going to help me and others make the best decision as to what's going to make Louisiana more successful.
Would you think it fair at this point in time you and David Bitter sort of had the same position on Common Core?
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, I know what my position was, and it was stated pretty early, and then he had one position, he stated another, but I know what mine is.
Reiterating it for us again?
Yeah, I think it's outrageous that there are attempts underway right now to scuttle Common Core as school has now started. The early statements were when school's going to start in just a couple of weeks, and I think at the end of the day, the courts are going to find that those who are seeking to stop the implementation of Common Core through the legal system are not going to be successful. And we have to continue to, as I've said before, talk to people who are concerned about Common Core, look at the objections that they have, find out what, if anything, can be done to tweak the program that we have. But we know that ACTs and SATs are now going to be aligned with Common Core, and that means students who are going to be proceeding on to secondary education need to be tested and need to be educated in a way that's going to be consistent with those tests. So that's the basis for my position, both from a procedural and a substantive standpoint. Carl?
Secrecy has been a hallmark of the general administration. If you were elected, what would you do to change, or would you change the approach to sharing information with the public?
Yeah, I would, and that's why I mentioned, I didn't realize you were a member of the working press anymore. I know you are, I'm just kidding. Yes, I would. In fact, I've already had some discussions with folks who've been examining that issue and trying to craft legislation that will recognize a legitimate deliberative process that ought to be afforded an executive branch of government, but also make certain that the people of this state recognize how decisions are being made and recognize how that process works. So the answer is yes, I'm absolutely open to changing the process, and was interested in Senator Adley's bill during the process a couple of years ago, although it has some flaws, I think, and needs to be looked at as well. But you're going to see a much more transparent administration, and the last thing I would want is for somebody to say that the Dardenne administration is secretive.
Jay, after you're elected governor, do you plan on letting the lieutenant governor know when you go out of town? Seriously, though, a major component of economic development?
Well, absolutely. In this job, I've seen more than ever the link that exists between economic development and tourism. I think they ought to remain separate. I think tourism needs to have a lieutenant governor who is championing that cause. But I think Louisiana also needs to have a governor who's championing that cause, who recognizes and supports what a lieutenant governor is doing, but also is involved himself or herself, as I would plan to be, because of the role I've had here now as lieutenant governor, and see the potential that exists, particularly as we have traveled internationally, which I had not done a lot of, frankly, and I've now done a couple of times with some of our target markets where we have representatives over there, and it is paying huge dividends. If you look at the 18% increase, you look at the fact that the IPW, which is the largest tourism gathering in the world, is going to be coming to New Orleans in 2016. This is not because of what we've done necessarily, but it is representative of the fact that international visitors love New Orleans, and that gives us a great opportunity to really showcase what Louisiana is all about. And we have people who make decisions every day about where their customers are going to travel.
It seems the longer that Senator Vitter is running in the governor's race, the more his positions seem to match yours a little bit. What do you see as the key contrast between the two of you, either in style or in policy positions at this point?
Well, certainly there's some very significant differences between us in style. We do things considerably differently. I'd say, for one thing, I have spent my entire career here in Louisiana trying to do what I can to make Louisiana better. I've not spent any time in Washington, D.C., where he's been for quite some period of time, and where we continue to suffer under the gridlock that seems to be hamstringing everything that Americans are concerned about. I've had the opportunity to run 2 state agencies, as I've said, and get my hands dirty in Louisiana government and actually making certain that we do great things. I've passed a number of pieces of legislation that made Louisiana better, like the community and technical college system, the creation of a constitutional amendment for victims' rights, the motion picture tax credit legislation, DNA, and so on. I was involved in a lot of things that I think made Louisiana a much better place, not to mention all the financial aspects of it when I served in the Senate. I think people would look at me and say, this is a guy who's going to listen, who is going to do what's best for Louisiana for the right reasons. He is going to attempt to build a consensus when he can, and when he can't, he's going to make a decision decisively and move on, but let people know why he's done it and why it's going to be best for Louisiana.
And on policy? Do you think y'all differ much on policy?
I think there are going to be some significant similarities between our policies, quite frankly. We're both very conservative in the way we approach government, and I think you'll find a lot of issues where we actually do agree on things, and that'll give people an even sharper contrast as to try and decide who they believe is better fitted to be the chief executive of the state. Yes, sir.
To what extent would you agree with the statement that Louisiana could be perceived as overly burdensome from the vantage point of occupational licensing in the forms of Auctioneers Licensing Board, Interior Design Board, Cosmetology Board, Shampooing Board, just throwing out a few examples? And to what extent might a Dardenne administration work toward alleviating some of those, if you do believe they are overly burdensome?
Well, the answer to the question is I don't know. I don't know enough about the overly burdensome nature of those particular entities you mentioned to tell you, yes, I think they are. But as I mentioned in my comments, everything I've done in the jobs I've had in public service has been geared toward streamlining operations, saving money, and finding ways to be more efficient. If there's a problem there, we'll fix it.
Thank you.
Why do you think there's so much litigation over the operations of government in Louisiana? It seems as though every week there's a new suit or countersuit or a suit questioning interpretation. Are we so bad at crafting our own laws that we have to sue to get things done?
Well, apparently we have been in the past several years because a lot of the pieces of legislation that have been passed have been challenged for a variety of procedural reasons, constitutional reasons, and some reasons that may not be as appropriate as those. I think you're right that there has been a flurry of this kind of thing, it seems, over the past several years. It's not at all uncommon, as we know, to see litigation and people question the constitutionality of a particular enactment, but we've certainly gone beyond just the constitutional challenges now to questions like multiple objects in a bill or not giving appropriate notice and what have you, which frankly we collectively, the legislature that I served in, was always, I think, very sensible and responsive about trying to make sure that didn't happen. And in a couple of cases, that seems to have happened. I mean, in this past 4 to 8 years. I don't know that it's a dramatic increase, frankly, but it is a lot more newsworthy, it seems.
Jay, because you understand the importance of your office in culture, recreation, tourism, and marketing, can we assume there'll be a significant or an appropriate increase in the budget of this office when you become governor? And also, because you understand the importance of the office, would you be willing to endorse a candidate or candidates to succeed you in this office?
Well, no, I'm not going to get involved in the latter at this point. Everybody can run on their own merits. The answer, technically speaking, for tourism is no. There would not be any more money in the budget, but there would be the ability to use the money that the law says already goes to tourism. It's one of the points I've made throughout. There's a statutory dedication of 3/100ths of a penny of sales tax for the Office of Tourism. If the office got everything it was supposed to get, an average of about $22 million a year, that would be plenty, frankly, for a state our size to be able to compete in a very competitive marketplace. So yes, I'm going to make certain that more dollars go to tourism, but it won't be because I'm going to necessarily direct new money there.
You have time for one more question?
Chair, I have one real quick. Where do you stand on film and entertainment incentives?
Well, I authored the bill that created the incentives.
There seems to be just a lot of pressure coming around saying we need to re-examine it.
Well, I think everything ought to be on the table. And I talked about exclusions and exceptions and what have you, including the one that's very dear to my heart, and that is that one. It needs to be looked at. I'm actually working with the industry to talk about what things can be done to address some of the concerns that people have. There's certainly a difference in opinion as to what the economic value of the industry is. I think it's been incredibly beneficial to Louisiana in so many aspects, including tourism, with the shows that have become popular in the movies made in Louisiana actually being magnets to draw people here to see where those movies are filmed. I'll just give you one change I know I would favor. I've talked to the industry about this, and that is to make certain we withhold from actors income that they receive before we send the money out to them, before the tax credit is calculated. So Louisiana's getting that money on the front end. There's no reason to not withhold, as we do with NFL players and NBA players for games that they play in Louisiana. The same ought to hold true for folks in that industry or in any other industry that come here and earn significant income. We ought to get our share. So it'll be on the table with everything else, but I think it has been extremely productive and beneficial for the state. It's created an infrastructure, and it's why you see these other states like California reacting to Louisiana's aggressive credit, because they're losing business, and it's obviously a business they want. So it's obviously a business we should want to hold on to. Thanks,